Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is The Raptor, and if you're anything like me, you love seeing your favorite characters fight to the death on Death Battle, as well as seeing them get the representation and recognition they deserve. Yes, it's awesome to learn about characters or series you've never heard of before, but nothing beats the feeling when that one character you've known and loved forever is given their time to shine. So today I've decided to give 10 characters I love and would really like to see get on Death Battle a little preemptive spotlight in this video. And yes, I'm just talking about never before used combatants here, since I already did a video for returning ones that mostly holds up still. I'm actually surprised I did that one so much earlier than this one, but either way, you have that one as well if you're interested. Now, I know what some of you guys might be thinking. Wait, Raptor, you already did a most wanted death battles video with over 100 characters. Wouldn't this list just be full of those guys? And you know what? Normally, I'd probably say yes. You're good for asking that. Well done. So because of that, today I'll be prioritizing characters where I don't currently have a specific preferred opponent for them. Almost like we're playing a game of Champions Island selection, since, in my opinion, those are the best kinds of characters for an event like that. So if you want to know my most wanted combatants from more of a matchup perspective, you can find that other video in the description. This list is much more from an individual character perspective, but I'll still mention some opponents for my picks when applicable. Okay, let's move it. Starting off with number 10, the Goblin Slayer. After being in this community for as long as I have, I think I can say this dude would be my most wanted Japanese light novel character to come onto Death Battle. I think a lot of us would appreciate more of those characters getting involved in general, really, but this is one of those standouts who kind of popped off in this community one day randomly. And I think that makes perfect sense because everyone likes to see this kind of character in this format. He brings in a lot of appeal that someone like Guts does, being hardcore and badass just for the sake of being hardcore and badass in this gritty, dark fantasy setting. I might just be a sucker for that genre. As far as any matchups I'd particularly like for him, obviously there was the Pitch Death Battle cast episode that pit him against Laios Toden from Delicious in Dungeon. That felt like a pretty entertaining discussion, whether it's just them or including their parties. I don't hear people shouting out Din Djarin the Mandalorian for him as much anymore, but I'd honestly still be pretty down for that. And there's some I've been enlightened to more recently, like Styx from Of Orcs and Men. There are more, obviously, and generally I think I'd prefer Goblin Slayer's episode to emphasize the fantasy side of things. Death Battle just tends to do pretty well with that, but any well thought out matchup with him would excite me a lot, and I think he's got a real chance for showing up sometime in the future. At number 9, Dr. Heinz Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb. When I think of villains, so to speak, that just completely crack me up, I immediately jump to this deeply troubled man. I tried watching and reading literally everything this franchise had to offer growing up, and while seeing the kids build all their crazy contraptions was a ton of fun, I was always so drawn to the interactions between Perry and Doof. Dan Povenmire really popped off with this character in all regards, and I've appreciated the way he's written more as I've gotten older. I've also been enjoying the new episodes coming out. To me, they're basically the same as the old ones, which is exactly what I wanted, but my thoughts on him getting a versus matchup haven't always been as straightforward. I'm gonna be honest, this guy barely counts for this ranking because there aren't a ton of realistic options for him I'd be over the moon with. I know I've said before Dr. Draken from Kim Possible I think would be fun. Honestly, that would excite me quite a bit more than Kim versus Perry, but Petey the Cat from Dogman is also majorly in the running now. Gun to my head, I'd probably choose him over Draken. But really, that's kind of it at the moment. I think Plankton could work well for Doof, but I also think he's got better opponents, and while I think Doof is Mr. Crocker's best 1v1 matchup, it just falls shorter thematically to me. But the point still stands, I think this would be such a great character to get his own Death Battle episode, and there's definitely a lot of ways to do it. On to number 8, Kaor from Chaotic. Yes, this is a personal one, because I don't know how many people remember or even know what Chaotic is. To put it simply, this was my Pokemon. It was a trading card game, an online game that quickly got made into an animated series. I watched everything as a kid and collected so many of the cards to play with my brother, which I still have. For the record, I controlled the Underworlder and Danian tribes while my brother had the Overworlders and Mepedians, and we split the Marillions. Kaor is the ruler of the Underworlders, and therefore the chaotic rep I would want the most, but I unfortunately never owned any of the physical physical Kaor cards. They were just too rare for me to find. While this character is a very easy pick for me for a list like this, he's also one of those guys where I don't currently have any idea who I'd want him to fight. I'm sure I could come up with something given the time. It would likely have to be some kind of tribal warlord, ideally with similar power, traits, or arcs, but I have a feeling that anyone I could find for Kaor may have a more popular or more fitting opponent already. And of course, Chaotic is way too niche now to get on Death Battle at all, as much as that pains me to say. I have actually seen one or two Maxor matchups, which I do think would be the series' best bet, whether it's Maxor from Harem or Tom as Maxor, but again, I'm not an overworlder bro, so I stick with Kaor. It won't happen, but I don't care. Next at number 7, Pop Fizz from Skylanders. This entry is very similar to Kaor in that he's kind of just my representative for the series in general, but of course the difference is Skylanders actually has matchups, including for most of the guys I'd really want. My preferred for Chaos, I've said before, Superhero Squad Dr. Doom. For Trigger Happy, at this point probably Ziggs from League of Legends. For Tree Rex, I might honestly say Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy, but my preferred for him might not necessarily be Tree Rex. I'd have to think about that more. I know Pop Fizz also technically has matchups, but I either don't like them or aren't familiar enough to label it a preferred idea for him. That could very well change eventually though. And either way, nothing changes the fact that I absolutely loved this character and playing as him in Giants and Swap Force. The elements I collected were Magic, Water, Tech, Life, and Dark, and Pop Fizz remained one of my favorite Magic fighters across all the main games. I went through the Beast Mode upgrade path, best decision I ever made. He was so much fun. I think any Skylander analysis would be difficult to write, since there isn't much lore regarding most individual characters. I definitely don't see Death Battle doing many episodes from this series, if any at all. But damn it, this was such a huge part of my childhood, and I want to see him try anyway. To paraphrase this little gremlin alchemist himself, it's all in the motion of the potion. For number 6, Invincible from Image Comics. Like most people, I was aware of the comic books for some time, but it really was the Prime Video show that got me hooked on the franchise as a whole. I'm a couple episodes behind on it though, so please don't say anything about second half of season 4. But for real, I am patiently waiting for Invincible himself to get his Death Battle episode, not even from a power scaling perspective, but from a character study one. He's a flawed character, and while that doesn't always necessarily feel intentional in the writing, it still makes for a lot of room for discussing the differences in morality and the values these kinds of heroes can have. Some call Mark a mix of Superman and Spider-Man, and while that is true on the surface, he reacts pretty differently to the similar trials he's put through. Like Doofenshmirtz, I have a de facto primary opponent in mind for Mark, that being Radiant Black, also from Image Comics, but I'm not married to that idea just yet, and frankly, I think he's likely gonna fight someone more popular. Another top pick for me would be Hot Rod or Rodimus Prime from Transformers, which I think would be a bit more likely, but as long as he's not put into a painfully obvious one-sided massacre on either side, I think I can be flexible. I'm not the biggest fan of the tonal clash between Invincible and Steven Universe's action, but aside from that, I think that matchup does work on a few big levels. If it has to be someone from Dragon Ball, DC, Marvel, etc., I would definitely say Sam Alexander Nova, and you know what? I don't think Luke Skywalker is the worst opponent Mark has. Don't at me. Some are way better than others, but he's got decent choices. At number 5, Joseph Joestar from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Like most people, I'm specifically thinking of the young Joseph from Part 2. I don't know if Hermit Purple would affect how Death Battle would handle things, so I'm just keeping it simple for this. Joseph is almost certainly my favorite JoJo. I don't know if I want to say he carries battle tendency, but I've got no issue claiming that he's the best part of it for me. He's so fun to read and watch. He's the exact kind of protagonist I like for a series as bizarre as this one. To me, he deserves to get an episode at some point. Didn't have to be immediately, but at some point. And for me, he's perfect for a list like this or an actual Champions Island because I think his matchup spread is actually pretty damn good. At this point, I would argue Joseph's two opponents that get the most attention these days days are Johnny Cage from Mortal Kombat and Edward Elric from Fullmetal Alchemist. That one's his legacy matchup for all intents and purposes. I'd be satisfied with either of those, maybe Johnny a little more but not hugely, but there's a good few other possible opponents for him that utilize similar or different appeals quite well in my opinion. It's in this weird middle spot where I don't think Joseph has such an amazing matchup that it blows all the others out of the water, but I'd be very content with different routes Death Battle could take. I do find it a bit strange just how many Marvel characters get paired with him, so some of those I definitely don't think are as good as the others, but yeah, Joseph was a big inspiration for this video, to be honest. I'm sure you can see why. On to number 4, Waluigi from Super Mario. Most of my favorite Mario characters have been used on Death Battle already, but there's at least one major exception to that. I have grown such a larger appreciation for Waluigi and what he exists to be. He's in my revolving door of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe mains. I still don't have a Switch 2, and it would take a lot for me to want to get one, but for him to start as just a teammate for Wario essentially, yet develop a sort of cult following of his own, I think is a beautiful thing. And it's gotten to the point where he deserves more than what he's been given. If he can't be played in Smash Bros. Or any of the mainline Mario games, we can at least give him a Death Battle, right? I think so, especially with the versus ideas that have caught on for him. Some of you guys may have already heard my stance on Waluigi matchups. I think Robbie Rodden from Lazy Town is one of his best, and in a sense his most ironic opponent, which feels very fitting for him. However, this idea to me also kind of overshadows other legitimately good ones, like Dick Dastardly from Wacky Races. Yeah, it focuses a lot on the Mario Kart side, but I don't think that's entirely inappropriate. Another one being Mortimer Mouse from Mickey Mouse. It feels kind of random, yet brings all the proper vibes and ridiculous power, and any of these fights I'd be very down for seeing. Like Joseph, it's not too common I'll come across a character I like this much and don't have a distinct preferred amongst their major options, but hey, all the more chances to be happy with it. Getting to the top 3, Nightcrawler from Marvel's X-Men. Aside from possibly Spider-Man, Kurt Wagner has been my #1 favorite Marvel Comics hero since before seeing X2. But for a while, that actually wasn't enough to put him on a list like this because his survivability was busted at one point. I'm not even talking about the weird Krakoa stuff that applied to all mutants. Nightcrawler had to sacrifice his soul to return to the living world after he died, meaning he could not enter the afterlife again, and he had no soul to target either. For these reasons, I had believed he wasn't really suitable for a show like Death Battle, maybe outside of very specific things, but it doesn't seem like that's how it works in the comics anymore. So assuming that's true, fuck it, I want him on bad now. I think the Nightcrawler opponent I've gotten more into most recently is Nico D'Angelo from the Percy Jackson franchise. I think it's a pretty inspired idea, but not such a match made in heaven to cement it as my preferred yet. I feel like I also have to bring up Blake Belladonna from RWBY due to how long that matchup's been around. I've gone back and forth on it a lot, but I can understand the appeals either way. And to add one more, maybe Kuriko Shirai? I still don't really know a certain magical index too well, but I've seen this fight get tossed around, so I wouldn't mind looking into it a bit more. It could suck for all I know, but hey, it's there. And if anything, I hate number 5 versus Nightcrawler even more than I did before, so that's probably where my list ends for now. For our runner-up, Commander Spock from Star Trek. If you've seen some of my videos before, this may have been the first guy you thought of when you read the title, and yes, I'm bringing him up again. Not only is Spock one of my favorite characters across the entire franchise, he's the face of the most significant sci-fi property ever made, maybe outside of Doctor Who. You could count Star Wars if you want to, but to me that's just fantasy in a sci-fi setting. Either way, that cultural impact alone means Star Trek deserves at least one episode of Death Battle, and that's not even counting the tons of new material that's put it back into the public consciousness a bit more. To me, there's no excuse, but in terms of Spock matchups, we have no Spock matchups. Okay, that's not entirely true. I have seen a small number of ideas thrown out or even suggested to me directly, but I definitely haven't seen one yet that truly speaks to me. Even more shockingly, the fact there's not any sort of obvious pick for him, not even an obvious one that kinda sucks, and it's the reason why he's basically completely absent from these discussions. I'm fortunate enough that Star Trek has its share of workable matchups, like Kirk versus Solo, Picard versus Thrawn, and a few others if you look hard enough, but I will always keep my eye out for something great we could give to the half Vulcan. And if that does ever happen, it may very well dominate in my top 50 most wanted death battles, but again, I am not willing to settle with this one. I'm not interested in forcing anything. It needs to be an actual fitting comparison for Spock. And finally, my most wanted new character for Death Battle, Beast Boy from DC's Teen Titans. On this side of comics, there is no debate. He's been my favorite DC hero for the majority of my life, and I desperately want him to get that top tier Death Battle treatment because honestly, I think he needs it. Not just because his powers are way stronger than any cartoon would have you believe, his personality is also not seen very accurately by most. He's similar to the Human Torch to me in that he is a jokester and a bit of a hothead sometimes, but that's overshadowed the other layers of his genuine heroism and his compassion thanks to his popular media. And I love him in Teen Titans and Young Justice, but there is way more to him. Now, some of you may remember that I put Beast Boy versus Kamen Rider O's in my top 50 most wanted death battles and claimed that to me, this was Beast Boy's most well-rounded popular option. And while I still feel that way to a large extent, that matchup's really only there because of Beast Boy. No offense to Kamen Rider, of course. Meaning I'm still open to seeing what other ideas get tossed around or get more popular. And honestly, despite the rules I put together for this ranking, I'd be betraying myself not to put this guy in. He's the one character on my channel banner that hasn't gotten a Death Battle episode yet for good reason. He's the character I submitted to the actual Champions Island for good reason. There is simply no other choice for number one. I have faith in you, Garfield. We'll get you there someday. And as you can probably guess, that'll wrap it up for today. If you liked any of my picks or have any major matchups in mind for them, let me know in the comments. And of course, share the characters you most want to see get on Death Battle. Like and share this video if you liked it, subscribe if you're new and want to see more, and especially huge thanks to the channel members. You are the best. See you in the next one. Have a great day, and peace out.